Figure It Out podcast. Living that marketing life. Fuel marketing through education, inspiration, and motivation. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode or any other episodes, suggest it to someone who may enjoy it as well. Here is your host, Frankie Enzi.
Hello everyone, and once again, thank you for listening. Today's episode's a fun one. Found her online through a Facebook group messenger, messaged her on LinkedIn, and now here we are going to do a podcast. She's a content marketer, a very highly skilled copywriter, and she has her own podcast, which we'll talk about later. Ladies and gentlemen, Kalie Souknary. Welcome to the Figure It Out podcast. Kalie Souknary.
Hi.
Are you excited to be here?
I'm so excited to be here. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. It's the first day back of the NBA, so I double booked myself, but it's okay. Priorities.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people are excited about that, and I'm just like, wait, sports are back?
I know, it is kind of weird. So I'll just tell everyone how we met because it's kind of random. I was thinking to myself, I want to get a content marketer or copywriter on my pod, and I was like, I don't know anyone. Then you somehow posted in a Facebook group, and then you were posting how you have videos on LinkedIn. So I was like, well, I got to check this out. So I went to LinkedIn, found your videos, and I reached out, and then you were like, yeah, I have a podcast too. So I listened to that, and then now here we are.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And those groups are so useful, like LinkedIn and Facebook groups. I've been able to find so many connections through those. So I'm definitely glad to see that it's actually, that you, first of all, checked it and that you wanted to connect with me. So thank you for having me.
Actually, I think you're the first one I've done contacted off Facebook. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I try to keep my professional connections off of Facebook. Like I'm in the HubSpot marketer to marketer group, and I had some people try to add me on Facebook from that group. And I was like, if you want to connect with me, please go to my LinkedIn.
It's sad how people are just so, I don't want to say desperate, but I'll just add this stranger and like, who knows what will come of it, right? And it's like,
right.
No, I have a real life and I don't know you. Like, it doesn't work like that.
Exactly. And I actually had my mechanic try to add me on Facebook, and I was actually a little bit creeped out by it. So don't add people you don't know on Facebook.
Mechanic, that's random. So yeah, we'll talk about your copywriting, content marketing, then we'll talk about your thoughts on LinkedIn because you did a podcast on it. I thought it was very useful and helpful. Then we'll talk about your podcast. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Perfect. So how did you end up in copywriting and content marketing?
So I've always been a writer, and I never realized my true potential in writing until later in life. But when I was a kid, I was a writer. I made my 7th grade English teacher cry with one of my journal writings in middle school. So I've always been a writer, but I never really wanted to do it until people were like, you're really good at this, So in college, I was a news anchor for the radio station KTSW 89.9, and I wrote local news stories. So I interviewed a lot of local government. I went to a lot of different events, including on campus and off campus. So it just depended on what they assigned to me. And that's kind of where I got my copywriting start, because I not only turned them into actual airing stories, but I also had to write for the blog. And I contributed a lot of blog content as well. So that started my portfolio. I did, to make money in college, I was a leasing agent. And so that's when it kind of distracted me away from my copywriting skills. But I was still always the one creating copy for social media posts. I was making suggestions for emails and things like that. Eventually, when I moved out to Oregon, I realized that I hated being a leasing manager. And all of my work was very mundane. I didn't really feel like I was making a difference. And that's when I was like, okay, it's time to hone in on copywriting and marketing in general. So I started applying to jobs in Austin because I wanted to come back home. And I got my role as a marketing specialist here in Austin. And it started off pretty vague. My role as a marketing specialist, I didn't specialize in anything technically. I was training clients on how to use their CRM, like Marketing Cloud and Pardot. And this was way before HubSpot really became one of the, what would you call it, thought leaders in the industry. Because up until recently, they haven't really been like the front runner. So eventually my role as a marketing specialist started to shape into what it is these days, which is social media, copywriting, and content in general, like white papers, things like that. I wrote blogs for my clients, automated bookkeeping software, men's fashion, manufactured homes, and body modification. Kind of, it ranges because I did freelancing, contract writing, as well as my full-time copywriting job. In February, I was promoted to senior copywriter. So on top of my primary clients, I was also helping other specialists with their clients as long as the project entailed messaging. So I was making sure that the quality of work across the department was solid, it was consistent, and it was, according to industry standards. So right now, I also have my podcast, which I do all the copy for. We're working on a content audit for the website, and I create all the social media for that as well.
What would you say was like you said, your teacher noticed that you were such a good writer? What do you think was contributing factor to that?
A contributing factor to that is that I believe that the best copy tells a story. And that's exactly what I did when I made her cry. It was this like freestyle writing period where she wanted us to write about something in our childhood. And I remember just I wish I still had it because it was honestly such a great story. And I believe it could still make people cry today. Not humble at all when I say that, but I remember what it was sort of about. It was like a story about my mom doing my hair when I was a kid and how, her hands used to pull on my hair to the point where I'd be like, this hurts. But it's also that very nostalgic feeling of having your mom doing your hair. And so I think what made her cry was the fact that like it brought her back to those days, because obviously she was older than me. She was probably mid 40s at the time. And so she may or may not have had her mom at the time. So I think to pull her back into that was very meaningful for her. And we're still friends on Facebook, and her name is Cindy Deneen, and she's my favorite teacher I've ever had. I've had a lot of favorite teachers, but she's definitely one of the most influential in my writing career because she really brought it to my attention that I could do this.
It's cool how you still remember this one story and this teacher, and it's like many years later.
I know. Yeah. And I think about, I honestly probably have one of the best memories out of all my friends. I could bring up things that no one else would remember, and they'd be like, that never happened. I'm like, oh yeah, it did.
Is it because you wrote it down?
No, I've always had really good memory. I rarely write things down, which I'm trying to get better at, especially as a writer.
Especially nowadays. So,
yeah.
Kind of what you were saying earlier, you had a job, but they made you do all these different tasks that wasn't specific to copywriting or content marketing. And it's kind of weird how when you say marketing, everyone expects you to know social media, know digital marketing, know ads, know this software, know this app, know this type of skill. It's like, how are we going to know all this with
No. Yeah. Marketing is such a blanket term. There's so many things within marketing that it's really hard to be a well-rounded marketer. I try my best. I consider myself very agile in marketing. However, there are definitely a set of skills that I'm way better at. Like if you ask me to build a website from scratch using HTML and CSS, it'd probably be done in like 9 months. But if you ask me to write, a 1,200 word blog, I could have it done in 3 days, tops.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I started. My buddy told me how to do SEO, and I started I started blogging, and I was writing, and I'm not a very good writer, I'm not. Mm-hmm. And I was writing. And I was like, it's like 3 paragraphs. I'm not even close to what I want to say. And then I don't know if you know who Seth Godin is. Seth Godin.
Yes.
Okay. Apparently he writes a blog every day. I'm like, I need to read this. So I go and I see that they're short. I'm like, okay, that makes me feel a lot better. I used to do short blogs every day, kind of like quick thoughts, quick poems. So yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know. Blogging's pretty cool though. I've started doing it a lot more. So it's been fun.
Yeah, I've always had a blog, like ever since I was 12. Do you remember what Zanga is?
I don't know what that is. Maybe we didn't have that in Canada.
Probably, maybe not. But Zanga is a blog host website. And I remember I jumped on it when I was 12 and I would just write about whatever was going on in my life, which was probably about the boy that I liked at the time. And then Tumblr came around. I'm sure you know what Tumblr is.
Yeah, I got in late, but it's like I watched a YouTube video of it and it was just this most cracked out explanation of just like there's no rules anyway. So go on with your story.
Yeah, no, Tumblr really has no rules except you can't have any adult rated content on there anymore. They banned it it was either late 2019 or early 2020, which is great. You know, it keeps a lot of X-rated content off of the wrong eyes, I guess is the best way to put it. But anyway, when I was 14, I had a blog on Tumblr and I was just writing about things going on in my life. It was definitely a very nice outlet for me because I had a lot of things going on when I was a teenager. So I used to write about things going on in my life, things going on at school. I would make and delete blogs all the time. And, you know, when you're going through old work, you're always like, oh, I don't want to keep this. This is cringy. So you delete it. And then later on in life, you're like, I really wish I would have kept that because I want to look back on it and see how much I've grown. And even to this day, I recently deleted one of the blogs that I started in college. It was called Growing Pains. It was about holding on to your adolescence as you grow through your 20s. And I wrote about being away from home for a year and all this other stuff. And when I deleted it, I was like, oh, I don't want to keep this. This is like gross. And then I deleted everything. I kept my most, technical written posts. And then I got rid of everything else. The other day, I was just like, I should have held on to that, like not everyone needs to see it, but I should be able to see it. For any writers out there who want to throw away your work, think twice about that.
No, you're totally right. Because there's some stuff like that I've done work-wise that I just didn't keep, like a report or like even pictures of like stuff I did before, like social media and like, yeah, there's so many things that I wish, I agree with you. There's so many things I wish I kept. You never know, right? And you can like build off it and you can even always improve it like to this day and like show like part one, part two, like over like, 10-year span or something, right? Yeah. What advice would you like? I've seen the video on LinkedIn. What advice would you give to new? Because it's like a big thing now. It's like Instagram's like those like cartoon posts where it's like top skills of 2020 copywriters. I see it more and more now. So what would be your tips for that for people trying to get into it or who struggle with it?
What he's referring to is my Kalie's Tips for Copywriters video series on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn to view these tips every Tuesday, except this past Tuesday I missed it. I just wasn't having a very good mental health day. So I chose not to do one, which is totally valid. And I think people need to accept the fact that like you're human. You're going to have those days where you're just going to wake up and not feel it. And if you have that availability to give yourself a break when you need it, then totally do it. But going back to the topic of what advice would I offer, my first one will always be just do it. Like the number one mistake that aspiring copywriters make is waiting for someone to hire them. You literally need nothing else but your laptop and an idea. Sit down and write about it, let it all flow. And you can always just go back and edit what you don't want. So that's always going to be my number one tip. And I think another thing that I would offer is follow other people who are doing the same thing, who are thought leaders in that space, because I'm not the perfect copywriter by any means. So what I did was go through LinkedIn, search for other copywriters, follow them, see what they're doing. You should probably read a lot of blogs because, in high school and college, you learn how to write the professional way, quote unquote, professional. And the thing about writing professional papers compared to blog posts and social media posts is one of them really needs to be more digestible than the other. And when it comes to the internet, no one's going to sit there and be like, oh, let me read this like 15-minute post.
Yeah.
There's no way. So learn how to get your message across in the shortest way possible. And that only comes with practice. So if you're wanting to be a copywriter, practice, practice, practice. Write something every day, whether it's a one paragraph, one page, or 10 pages, like it can really be about anything.
No, you have so many good points there that I want, like, different parts. I was actually a night editor for a magazine while I was living in China. And like I said, I'm a horrible writer, but they knew that I knew everyone in the nightlife. So I was like, yeah, I'll do it, sure. And I was like, how do I write better? How do I make my writing more concise? So I looked on, like, one of the suggestions was go on Wikipedia, whatever you read, make it even shorter. It's like, oh, that's hard. But anyways, it's helped. And kind of what you're saying with the writing and the idea, just write your idea. Kind of going back to Seth Godin was, he always says that you don't have writer's block. You're just scared to write something bad. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And then, like, I have this new, like, philosophy of idea. And, like, if you have an idea, there's a reason why you have this idea. Yeah, spit it out and let people know it. People might share it with you. People might have the same ideas. And, like, that'd be so random. So you're totally right. Like, just put yourself out there. And I even think that, like the older generation of, like, professional writing is going to slowly slip away because, like, look at texting that ruined, like, so many, like, words and spelling and, like, writing, like, so yeah, it's very interesting what you said, because it's totally it's going to be the new way of writing and reading and going forward.
Right. And it's always evolving. Like, I follow Moz on LinkedIn as well. And they really teach you how to write around SEO. And that's another thing too, is if you're going to write for websites or, B2B software, things like that, you definitely need to understand how the search engine works. So while you're learning how to write, I would definitely do research on search engine optimization.
I didn't know Moz had, like, did the tips for writing, but they were giving out the free courses because of COVID, so I took advantage of that. And I was like $600 worth. So that I learned the SEO. So let's talk more about, like, you did a good podcast episode on LinkedIn. Well, I just started using it because in China it was actually blocked, surprisingly. It's like professional app, but it was blocked. So I just started using it, and it's cool, like, who you can reach out to and the type of stuff people post. So, like, what would be your experience with LinkedIn? Anything interesting that came out of it besides, like, us meeting, but anything else?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for LinkedIn. I honestly think they should hire me because I'm so obsessed with them. But so LinkedIn, it's a professional tool that a lot of people take for granted. For one, you can connect with people who make decisions at companies. That's huge. Like, that's like being in a building and being able to step into anybody's office. That's connecting with people who can take you up the ladder, who can get you that appointment that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. So my experience with LinkedIn is, first of all, I landed my contract job through LinkedIn there's this group called Austin Digital Jobs. They're on Facebook and I believe LinkedIn. And they throw a networking event usually every month, but since coronavirus started, they haven't been meeting. And I went to one of those networking events and I met an SEO director. And from there, he posted something on LinkedIn looking for a copywriter contract position, at will employment. And so I applied. There were about, I think, 80 to 140 inquiries.
Wow.
And I made the first round, I made the final 3. And then there was, like, another sample that I needed to turn in. And I was 1 out of 2 people chosen. So that connection right there was super strong because all I had to do was literally go to a networking event that I found on the internet, So that's something that's super useful, as well as messaging hiring managers, following up with your interviews. I wouldn't say it's the best idea to add your prospective employer on LinkedIn. I actually recently did that only because our conversation was so fluid. And in the message, I said, hey, I would love to connect. And I don't usually add prospective employers on LinkedIn, but I truly, really enjoyed our conversation. Whether or not you choose to bring me on the team, I would love to keep this connection. And she responded and said, I too don't usually add prospective employees on LinkedIn, but I actually really enjoyed our conversation as well. And whether or not we choose you, I would love to help you in any way I can. So it's things like that, like building relationships with professionals that just, there's something just so magical about LinkedIn when it comes to that. And I also think that if you're going to use LinkedIn, don't just add anybody, because there's a lot of people out there that just want to sell you products. And I understand that salespeople do use LinkedIn as a sales tool, but depending on what you're using LinkedIn for, you should really be picky and choosy about who you're adding. And when I say that, I mean like, okay, I'm a copywriter. I want to connect with other marketing professionals. And yes, there's going to be salespeople that I add as well, but that's because I worked with them. And it is important for marketing to understand the sales pipeline. So it's helpful to have those connections as well. For all the men out there, definitely don't use it to hit on women, because we do get that a lot. It's actually ridiculous how many people hit on you on LinkedIn. Like, I remember one time there was this guy I worked with. He messaged me on LinkedIn probably 2 months after he left the company. And he was like, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Making small talk, which I hate small talk. And he was like, basically what I'm saying is I would love to take you out for a drink. And I was like, no, like you just ruined this whole relationship we had. It was great before you hit on me. He followed up with me in March when coronavirus started and like quarantine was in place, or even more in place than it is right now. He was like, do you want someone to text through all of this? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I look at a screen for more than 8 hours a day. I had my full-time job on top of trying to get the podcast off the ground. Like, no, I don't want to text. I barely want to call people. Mm-hmm. So what makes you think I'd want to text you through this? And so I ignored the message. And that is definitely not what LinkedIn is for. If you're going to hit on someone, go to their Instagram or follow their Twitter or something. Don't hit on me on a professional platform, especially knowing that like your job is readily available on your headline. And I could easily screenshot your message and send it to your employer and tell them that you're harassing me, So that's really risky right there.
It's not even interesting. It's just, I didn't want to say it's sad. It's just pathetic. Like, he had all this time before to man up and tell you how he really felt, I guess, like, and then he waits for a while. You should have just brought it up before, and then you would have known a lot longer. And now like you said, you ruined this. Like, at least it would have been awkward then, but then you guys would have figured it out. And then right. Now he's all creepy. And like you said, like, you can just screenshot and like throw him under the bus, but like, I don't know if you will or won't, but there would be other people who would be like, this guy is being creepy. I don't want this to happen to other people. And it is like, how do you not know that it's a professional platform? So what are you like in the office,
Right.
So it's just, I don't know. I've been hanging out with like a few of my female friends, and just the stories they tell me of dudes. It's like, yeah. Oh man, we are awful.
I mean, it's not like he was provocative, because it'd be one thing if he was provocative, but he was polite, and that's what I can appreciate. However, there are definitely women out there who have received provocative comments, asking for sexual favors through LinkedIn. And it's like, you cannot be serious, and I definitely have one of those best case scenarios when it comes to this is he was only asking to contact me more. If it would have been like, hey, I would love to like come over and do the things with you, then that would be totally different. I would have definitely thrown him under the bus. But since he was just asking to be more in contact with me, I was just like, let me just ignore this and let it pass.
It's crazy because I did the math a long time ago once, and if like for a female, let's say 18, even it's probably a few years before 18, like people start hitting on you, and let's say, I don't know what happens. Let's say it happens 4 times a day. Whatever it's like a text or a like or a poke or anything that's like flirtatious. And you do that, 4 times 365. I don't know. It's like 1,200 something. And like, let's say by the time you're 30, that's over like a million times. I don't know, my math is up, but you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. It's like, no wonder why it's like girls are fed up. It's like, creepy dudes all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also with LinkedIn, when it goes back to tips, put everything from your resume onto your profile. Your resume should be a direct, or vice versa, actually. Your LinkedIn needs to be a direct reflection of your resume as well, because especially if you're a salesperson, people will look at that and see like, okay, well, this person knows this and this person knows this, but they don't have this. There were many times, there was a point when I worked at my old company where we had no director. So our PMs, our project managers were the ones like kind of not necessarily running interviews, but they knew who we were interviewing. So those PMs would come back to us and be like, yeah, we interviewed blah, blah, blah. You can look at their profile on LinkedIn. And we always did, all of us. We always looked at their profile because we want to know what they have to offer our team. It's important that you have that information on there because, one, it makes you more credible. And two, like, it looks like you have a personality. You're not just a profile. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not only having that experience on there, but also, getting recommendations from your past clients, people that you've worked with, upper management would be really useful. And then I also recommend putting your, like, what you do in your headline, because that gets a lot of attention. And then finally, what I would recommend, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but I just think it looks good, have a picture behind your profile picture, the header picture up there.
The banner?
Yeah, the banner. Have a banner, because I think it builds a brand for yourself. When you make connections, it makes them want to look at your profile. It makes them want to talk to you.
Yeah, those are great points because, I was lacking. And I had a couple of friends who are recruiters, and I was like, hey, pointers. They're like, why didn't you put this? Like, why didn't you put, like, you're teaching overseas? It's like, they don't care about that. It's like, of course they do. You went overseas and like did stuff that no one else did. Like, I was like, okay, sure. And then, I added the banner. So I actually did that recently. Kind of what you're saying before about it's always tricky. Like, I apply for a job. Do I contact them? Do I add them? So I was like, but like, and then you look and it's like 200 people apply. It's like, that means 200 people hit them up. But then I've heard on the other side, it's like, if you don't message them, you won't have any chance. So it's just like, I don't know. It's pretty intense. Like, it's a tough game to play.
It really is. Yeah. Like I said, I really don't recommend adding your prospective employers unless your message lets them know that you don't usually do that, but you really enjoyed your conversation. Because I do think that you can build relationships with prospective employers even if they don't hire you, but you got to be really careful. You really need to read the room. Did they really like you that much, or are you just imagining that?
Yeah, sure. It's a good point to look at it. So how have you used LinkedIn with your podcast? And we'll get more into your podcast after this.
LinkedIn with my podcast has been a little bit tricky. And I say that because I'm still trying to figure out the best ways to market my podcast when it comes to online presence. Because, you listen to episode 5. Episode 5 was way more explicit than most of my other episodes.
Oh, yeah.
And not all of my previous employers, as well as my prospective employers, need to see that side of me. However, I do want them to know that I have that podcast and it is what it is, and I'm not going to apologize for it. When it comes to my podcast and LinkedIn, I definitely have in my experience section that I am the host and producer and editor and content creator of my podcast. I treat it just like any other job description. But when it comes to the company page of my podcast, I haven't really touched it very much because I'm still trying to figure out the best way to approach it on LinkedIn. I don't think that necessarily every episode needs to be shared to LinkedIn, especially not episode 5. But I think the more professional topics will be shared on LinkedIn. Just like I said to you before, everything on the show will not be for everybody, but the show will have something for everybody. I'm still doing a little bit of testing when it comes to LinkedIn. However, I think that if you have a side gig, that if you do things like this, you shouldn't be afraid to put it out there, no matter who's viewing it. Like, you should really be proud of what you're creating because that's an extension of yourself. I also believe that with the evolving work-life balance in our current generation, a lot of the executive leaders at different companies are very comfortable, if not encouraging, when it comes to you having those sort of side projects. They like to see that because it shows that you have drive, you have more to focus on other than just having a 9-to-5 job. They really do have an appreciation for that. And if they don't, if they, frown upon it or if they consider it unnecessary, then that's just not someone you want to work for.
Yeah, you're totally right, because you don't want someone uptight, like, oh, you have a podcast, you talk about this stuff, like, why would you do that?
Right.
It's like, you don't, like, okay, if you don't, then like, I don't really want to be like, I don't want to be around you, but we should probably wouldn't be talking anyways. And like, imagine working for you or with you, and then couldn't joke around. So it'd be yeah, it would be annoying. I one thing about the podcast, what you said about the projects, like when I came back to Canada after China, which was like late September of 2019, almost a year now. Oh my god, what was I doing? I was like, I've always wanted to start podcast. I've always wanted to start podcast. I was like, screw it, let's do it. And then since I've done it, it's actually been so many cool stories. I've had people from different countries reach out. I've had people from different cities in America reach out, different industries, different businesses, and because of LinkedIn and Instagram, all these people message me and added me. And then like, you look at I look at my data, and it's like Germany, like Ireland, like I don't know, like, it's interesting. And I think it is a cool side project, because for me, and I think I mentioned this to you before we started talking, is like I learned so many new skills doing a podcast. I learned graphic design. I learned different Adobe products. I learned I even learned Zoom better. So no, it's cool, and it's very interesting. And I don't know if this happens to you, so maybe you can tell me. When I'm with my friends and we meet someone new, like, oh, this is Frank, he has a podcast. You have a podcast? And it's like, yeah, I guess. Like, it was not that big, but yeah,
Right.
people are like so into it. So, and people are like, can I be on your podcast? So yeah, sure, let me know when. And I never hear from them again. But
Yeah. And actually, sometimes I'm very hesitant, depending on who I'm around, to tell them I have a podcast, because you get different reactions. Some of them are super excited and want to hear all about it. And then some of them are like, oh, cool. And that's it. Sometimes I'm like, wow, they don't want to hear about it because, they don't follow it up with anything. But then you get those people that are like, oh, cool, like I want to be on it. Well, here's the thing. If you're going to be on my podcast, there's some prerequisites for that.
it's true.
If you want to be on my podcast, you first of all need to understand how to hold a conversation. You need to have a topic in mind. Like, you can't just come on the podcast and waste 2 hours of my time.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to have something to talk about, I need you to be able to have something to talk about. Drive the conversation. Let me know that you have a box to stand on. Another thing is, like, maybe there's not another thing, honestly, but yeah, holding a conversation and having a topic to talk about are two of my must-haves. And on top of that, there is a third thing actually, and that is you need to have listened to at least 2 of my episodes, because if you don't understand my style, then we're probably not going to work, So yeah, those are my 3 prerequisites for being on the podcast.
No, those are good ones. Yeah, one time I did a podcast with this. I guess he's like a social media expert, TikTok expert, and he's in the same city I am. So I saw him on Instagram, and I followed him. And then he's like, "You're in Ottawa?" I'm like, "I'm in Ottawa." So and then I did a podcast with him, and I guess he has a huge following on Instagram. And a couple of people hit me up, and they're like, "What?" This woman from India was like, "What do I have to do to be on your podcast?" I looked at her, I looked at her profile. I was like, "Yeah, I'd for sure have you on. You're like, your Instagram game's fire." Like, yeah. And she's like, "Here's my resume." I was like, "Whoa, you're good. Like, you passed already." So, kind of going back to when you tell people you have a podcast and they don't care. I think there's 2 things about that. One is they're just closed-minded and they're just not supportive and they're negative, and like they're what, maybe if they don't, but there's how do I say this? So yeah, they're closed-minded, they're negative, they don't care. But who cares? Like, you don't, like, maybe you don't want them listening. And one thing, going back to Seth Godin, I guess you know who my idol is. It doesn't matter how many people you have, because let's say I actually, this guy, even because of podcast, this guy from Philippines wanted me to be on his podcast, and I told him, and this is a good quote that I want to write down one day, is that if one person listens to my podcast and tells me they like it, I'm so happy, because they took 45 minutes out of their day to listen to something I created, my idea, my work. And think about it, they could have done anything else. There's YouTube, there's Netflix. So to the people who don't care, like, you don't have to care. I don't like, I know a few of my close people having this new podcast. I'm not going to be angry at them,
Right.
But to those people, I think they're just closed-minded and like, I don't know, they don't care. And it's like, who cares? It's on them. They're missing out on a good conversation.
Exactly. And, especially towards the beginning of this, and I still do, but not as much, but I pay attention to who's listening to the podcast. Are my close friends listening to it? Is my family listening to it? I don't necessarily need my family family to listen to it because I don't talk to my family the way I talk to my friends. And my podcast is very like, these are for my friends, you know? I was originally getting kind of offended whenever my closest friends weren't listening to every single episode. Then I started thinking, you know, the right people will listen to the podcast.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it really doesn't matter who isn't listening to the podcast. What matters is the people that are listening are taking something from it and genuinely getting enjoyment out of it.
No, you're totally right. Because and going back to Seth Godin, he always says don't build it for everyone, build it for the right people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about more about your podcast. So like, where can people find it? Glass Bridges, right?
Yep. Glass Bridges podcast is available on all streaming platforms, but I try to push Spotify and Apple Podcasts as much as possible, just because that's really where people listen to the most of their podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Glass Bridges Pod, on Twitter at Glass Bridges Pod, and you can also search for us on Facebook and LinkedIn, Glass Bridges Podcast. Our website will be up soon. We have a photo shoot coming up to get some website content up there because it's very bland as of right now. So
I don't even have that. You're making me look bad. Sorry, go on.
No, see, the thing about me is when it comes to my Instagram, or at least the podcast Instagram and the website, I have a very specific brand aesthetic in mind. And branding for me is at the top of the list. Well, aside from content. But, you know, I think everything needs to be very cohesive. And so I'm very, very picky with it. We have actually done a couple of photo shoots already, and this will probably be our third one. And if this one doesn't go well, I might actually lose my mind.
Uh-oh. Throw out the microphone. Talk about a bit about your co-host.
My co-host is my best friend. Her name is Kalie Jones. She is also in marketing. She is currently a project manager at a small agency in Austin. And we really do level each other out because, you know, I'm either all the way up here or I'm all the way down here. There is really no in between because I don't know. I just feel like I have such a dynamic personality, but so does she. And that's the thing is like, I don't know. It's just like when I'm down, she knows how to pick me up. And if I'm like way too up here, then she knows how to humble me. It's just a very good balance. And I feel like what's funny is the day that I asked her to be my co-host, it just sort of like came up, and I really wanted to do like this whole, like, you know how when brides ask people to be their bridesmaids, they do this whole box where they give a gift and like they have a cute little
Okay, yeah.
I wanted to do that at first, but then I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna tell her. So we were on a walk at work. We used to work together, and I go, so about the podcast, she was like, oh no, because she thought I was going to say something negative. And I was like, I don't think it's going to succeed. And she was like, you shut up right now. And I go, wait, let me finish. I don't think it's going to succeed without a co-host. And she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, that being said, like, do you want to be my co-host? And she was like, oh my God, yes, yeah, of course. And so that's when we decided to do this. And like, I'm so glad because we already have such great conversations off the camera, off the microphone. And to have her on the show, I feel like it really complements, you know, because to be a individual co-host, I just can't imagine it because I'd just be talking to myself the whole time. So it's really nice to have someone else that I can rely on to drive the conversation and keep it dynamic.
I think that's cool because I kind of want to go back to your bridemaid proposal. It's funny for us dudes, like, hey bud, you want to be on the pod? Like, yeah, it's like, man, like tomorrow, like, you know, it's just like nonchalant. But no, the first thing I noticed between you two when I think it was episode 3, and you guys had a really funny story about some dude's chair, Mark's chair.
Oh, Matt's chair.
Anyways, but the flow that I really liked about you two is that I can literally picture, like, I didn't know what you guys looked at the time, but I can literally picture what, like, two girls at like a brunch, you know, just like banter, you know, it's just like two, you know, it's just, it was very lively and, you know, it was very energetic. So yeah, you're definitely right where you both like balance each other out.
I'm glad to hear that because that's our podcast is a pretty good reflection of our real life relationship. We just go back and forth, and it's just like, it's hard to explain, but if you listen to the podcast, it's exactly like our friendship.
And before we head off, why did you start the podcast?
There's a couple reasons behind that. So when I was growing up, like I mentioned, in my teenage years, a lot was going on for me. My parents had been divorced since I was 4, but my mom remarried when I was 12 and my dad remarried when I was about 13 years old, and then he had a baby. To have a half sister on top of 2 new marriages in my family, like, it's a lot, that's a lot for a kid. And your parents don't mean to by any means, but like they kind of put you on a back burner when they're starting to, starting new relationships. And so growing up, it was very dysfunctional. There was my family was not about confrontation. And if we were confronting each other, it was just bad. My communication skills really come from that because I want to have a healthy, communicative family one day. I also want to have much healthier relationships than what my parents had. That's where a lot of my communication skills come from. But another reason I decided to start the podcast is because it really doesn't matter who I talk to. I can get the most introverted person to open up to me. People started pointing that out to me. They'd be like, wow, Kalie, like I've never said these sort of things to someone before, and I haven't known you that long. Or they'd say, every time we talk, we go into these deeper subjects other than just what's going on in the world. I really appreciated that my friends are that comfortable with me, even if they're not friends with me. Like, I've had hour-long conversations with people I barely even knew. That's when I decided, I need to sit down and have these sort of conversations and air them, because there's a lot of division in our world right now.
Oh yeah.
Especially in politics, but it's all over the place,
Yeah.
Like with social media and how easy it is to cut people off. I think that communication is the foundation of strong relationships. Obviously, it's the foundation of strong relationships. The name Glass Bridges, connecting people in a transparent way.
I like it.
So that's how it came about. Our whole goal here is to, no matter what your point of view is, we have to find ways to get along if we're going to progress in society.
No, that's very touching. That's a deep story.
Yeah.
No, it's cool though. Like you're empathetic, and I'm really big on that. So like, you listen to people because no one likes listening. Everyone loves talking, So I think it's powerful. It's power that you have, and you're using the platform to let people know that, you're available and that it's okay to be who you are and share your story.
Exactly. And, we're going to get into a lot of touchy subjects at one point, but at the beginning stages, I really just want people to get to know us, which is why we haven't really touched those deep topics. I know that there's going to be times where I'm going to disagree very heavily with some of my guests. Those are the sort of tough conversations that need to happen.
No, you're totally right. Because if everyone's being yes, it'd just be boring.
Exactly. Yep.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on the air and filling in with stories and tips and expertise. So if there's anything you want to let people know, where to find you, your LinkedIn videos, your Facebook, more about your podcast, anything else you're doing, what would you like to tell them?
I mean, really, I don't consider myself a big deal, and I love talking. So thank you so much for having me. But you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Kalie Souknary, and I'm sure it'll be in the comments of this podcast as well as the social media posts. You can follow my Instagram if you can find it. But mostly, I really would just love to have more views. If you're looking for copywriting tips, my LinkedIn video series, Kalie's Tips for Copywriters, is going to run until I get tired of it or run out of tips. And then, like I said, just follow the podcast on Instagram at Glassbridges Pod or Twitter at Glassbridges Pod. And you can also search for us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And then eventually we'll have our website.
Yeah, because I was going to say, you guys would say that.
Figure It Out Podcast. Living that marketing life. Fuel marketing through education, inspiration, and motivation. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode or any other episodes, suggest it to someone who may enjoy it as well.